Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook, and it's the fourth week of 2014, the week of celebration of civil rights leader M.L. King. When King's anti-war, anti-racist, and anti-capitalist radicalism has to be played down a bit in order to accommodate the vicious military and economic policies of the Obama administration. Martin Luther King attacked America's wars for economic control of Southeast Asia, what we continue to call the Vietnam War, the precursor for Obama's wars for economic control of Southwest Asia today. And King also attacked capitalism. He said, quote, "One day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question," he said, "you're raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy and to ask questions about the whole society." Elsewhere, King added, "Call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children," close quote. In fact, since King's time, the distribution of wealth in the U.S. has moved acceleratingly in the other direction. And war and rumors of war are used to distract Americans from that fact, while our lives are confiscated by a small group of evil people in charge of our society, the 1%. Actually, only a fraction of the 1% of the population. 1% of the American population would amount to 3 million people, and the American ruling group is a deal smaller than that. So we're talking about, when we say the 1%, we refer to that fraction. We found, for example, in the news this week, that there are 85 people in the world who together control wealth equivalent to half of the human race. 3 billion people versus 85. So the balance is seriously out of order. Martin Luther King also attacked America's imperialist wars directly. In his largely ignored speech Beyond Vietnam, delivered 1 year before he was assassinated, he pointed out that the United States was, quote, "the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today," close quote. This was not an accident of the Vietnam War era. American presidents, as commanders-in-chief of U.S. military, have killed, wounded, and made homeless well over 20 million human beings in the last 50 years, mostly civilians, and the trend, of course, continues today. President Obama has killed thousands of people, including hundreds of children with drones alone. And a secret American army of 70,000 kidnappers and killers, called the Special Operations Command, is active in 130 of the 195 countries in the world. Martin Luther King is an example for the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana and the hundreds of similar groups around the country that oppose the ongoing killing by the U.S. government. Tonight we'll hear commentaries from several members of AWARE. Ron Zoke on Swiss cheese, Karen Aram on the Asia that Obama is pivoting to, Ron Kester on a U.S. government deal with a Mexican drug cartel, and if there's time, a fascinating piece by Chris Hedges on what Obama was really saying in last Friday's speech. And we'll begin with Ron Zoke and Swiss cheese. This is not the Velveeta crisis at Kraft, is it, Ron?
I'm all in favor of the Velveeta shortage, but anyway. I am alluding to two conferences starting in Switzerland this week at Montreux and Davos, and the strange incident of the last week or two in which the United Nations invited through the agency of Ban Ki-moon the Iranians to take part in this preliminary conference concerning the Syrian war. and which surprised apparently the American top brass in Washington. And then he, under American pressure, withdrew it the next day. So it seems to me, as a naive observer, that the important point would be to invite to this conference all the people who are participants or who have an interest in the outcome. And the media are full of accusations that Iran is supporting indirectly the Syrian regime. And so it seemed to be important to have them there too. But apparently through cranked up American pressure, Mr. Ban withdrew the invitation one day later, and now it's going to proceed without the representatives of this important participant, so we're told, in the war in Syria. So this dispatch in the New York Times says, under U.S. pressure, UN withdraws Iran's invitation to the Syria talks. So I'm talking today about some holes in the cheese and making some perhaps cheesy comments. Under intense American pressure, the United Nations on Monday withdrew an invitation to Iran to attend the much anticipated Syria peace conference, reversing a decision announced a day earlier. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, whose decision to invite Iran had threatened to unravel the Syria talks less than 48 hours before the scheduled start, issued a statement on Monday rescinding the invitation. The United States had said it was surprised by the invitation because Iran had not agreed to conditions for the talks to be held on Wednesday in Montreux, Switzerland. So this is a favorite trick, of course, if you don't want a conference to take place, right, or you think it may have a outcome that you dislike. Say, well, there's certain preconditions that must be met before we meet or have a conference, and you haven't met them yet. So it's essentially a demand that the other side give away the store before the action starts. And this is another hole of air or carbon dioxide in the cheese, I guess. Mr. Ban continued that he had been privately assured by the Iranians that they would respect the conditions, but in their public statements, Iranian officials said Iran had been invited with no such conditions attached. Given that it has chosen to remain outside that basic understanding, he has decided that the one-day Montreux gathering will proceed without Iran's participation, Mr. Ban's spokesman said in the statement. The invitation also angered the Syrian opposition and Saudi Arabia, Iran's regional rival and major backer of the Syrian insurgency, and they threatened to boycott the talks. Again, nothing is said about Israel or the Israel lobby in any of this, which is routine, I guess. The United States' long-standing position has been that Iran, a major backer of President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, must publicly endorse the mandate of the conference, which is outlined in a communique from a 2012 meeting in Geneva. That mandate says that the conference's purpose is to negotiate the establishment of a transitional administration that would govern Syria by mutual consent of Mr. Assad's government and the Syria's opposition. So again, this is something that the UN insists that must be agreed to in advance of the conference. It can't be left to just an outcome of the conference. And so that's why the Iranians can't be, shouldn't be invited. Mr. Ban has said that privately they have assured him that they will de facto observe this, but they haven't made a public announcement about this, and so they can't be invited. Since Iran has not publicly and fully endorsed the Geneva communique, a State Department official told reporters Monday morning, we expect the invitation will be rescinded. So once again, the United Nations is effectively under the control of the USA.
Exactly.
And why do we keep pretending that things are otherwise? Mr. Bond's reversal appeared to have salvaged the plan to proceed as scheduled with the talks which the United States, the United Nations, and Russia have been seeking to organize for months. So going on here, Vladimir Brahimi, the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, has long argued that Iran, as a major regional power, should be included in the talks. But he said last week that the decision on whether to invite Iran had been made by consensus among the United States, the United Nations, and Russia. And for his part, Mr. Assad said once again that he would not share power with his adversaries or accept the creation of a transitional government. So apparently these other participants, or potential participants, have to agree in advance to regime change, or there will be no conference. So what's happening in Montreux, or would have happened in Montreux tomorrow, is merely a preliminary conference for the real work which will get done in Geneva after 2 days of ceremonies in Montreux. And so that's another big hole in the cheese. Moving on to another Swiss location, Davos, the World Economic Forum annual meeting starts there tomorrow, I believe. High in the mountains, Swiss mountains, there will be a meeting of all these supposed world leaders. Here are some excerpts from a preliminary paper circulated apparently among the participants. One news story today is a lot of people are who you might think would be invited or show up or have in the past are skipping it this year because they don't see the point. This is a paper by Sebastian Backup, 4 big issues on the Davos program. These are the world leaders of global capitalism. In 1914, exactly 100 years ago, the First World War wreaked havoc across the world. It not only resulted in unimaginable suffering, it also ended an extraordinary era of economic globalization fueled by technological progress and imperial ambition. And it goes on to talk about what John Maynard Keynes said in his book, The Economic Consequences of the Peace. Going on, however, then as now, that is before World War I, strong economic, political, and social interconnections are not a guarantee for having peace and prosperity. Geopolitical rivalries are one, but not the only potential risk. Rising income inequality, eroding confidence in business and government, the impact we're having on our climate and resources, as well as the economic and societal effects of disruptive technologies are critical issues of global concern. This year's meeting will be structured around 4 themes: achieving inclusive growth, meeting society's new expectations, sustaining a world of 9 billion, and embracing disruptive innovation, it's called. If 2013 was characterized by the Eurozone crisis, and the years before that by a global financial crisis, 2014 is conspicuous for the fact that no acute crisis is so far dominating the agenda. Well, that's a matter of judgment.
Yes.
However, the recovery remains sluggish, and its fruits are unevenly distributed. In the United States, 95% of the gains of the recovery since 2009 have gone to the top percentile, the 1%, of the income distribution. Europe struggles too with rising income and opportunity gaps as a result of the economic crisis. And austerity measures also are all around the world. High youth unemployment poses a significant challenge to long-term stability and economic vitality. And what those seem to amount to, they're actually, in many cases, code words for more wealth for the very wealthy, for the 1%. Stability, growth, economic vitality. So it goes on to spell this out: society's new expectations concerning controlling inequality. The paper says, as a consequence of globalization and technological change, it quotes one analyst as saying, the ability of decision makers to exert power is in decay. Quoting, in the 21st century, power is easier to get, harder to use, and easier to lose. National protests, often organized through social media, challenge government authority. Globally, many players have sufficient power to block, yet few have enough power to come up with solutions. At the top of global companies, the tenure of executives has sharply decreased. Second theme, sustaining a world of 9 billion. The expectations that are most at risk of being sidelined are those of future generations. As a result of robust growth, millions of people are wealthier, healthier, and living longer than 20 years ago, this says. And this is only the beginning. By 2030, a study of U.S. National Intelligence Council predicts the global middle class will grow from 1 to 3 billion, while the global population will grow from 7 to 9 billion. The environmental and climate implications of this trend are huge and are likely to get worse if nothing is done. Next point, next theme, embracing disruptive innovation. Lastly, attention must be paid to the consequences, both foreseen and unforeseen, of disruptive science and technology, advancing manufacturing, digital health, robots connected to the cloud, autonomous drones. The digital revolution is not over, it has just started, and so on. Concluding, this week, leaders from the world of business, government, and civil society will explore these themes. The sessions at the annual meeting in 2014 are as diverse as they are numerous, covering topics such as the economic outlook in various regions, geopolitical issues, ongoing challenges such as the gender gap, youth unemployment, public health, threats to privacy, and climate change. So many of these sessions will be broadcast live. Others will be tweeted. And if you think this has any effect on anything that will actually happen, you might try to find those. There will be reports on YouTube, I'm sure, and other things appearing in the paper by people who think that what is said at Davos may be important. That's all.
Thank you very much, Ron. That was Ron Zook under the title of Swiss Cheese, alerting us to some of the rats that are involved in this particular set of problems today. You're watching Aware on the Air. We'll ask Karen Aram if she has some comments on
all I can no, nothing more than
Ron's
very
cheesy account.
well
Right.
said. Yes, well said. Are we meant to be informing people or entertaining people? I have to ask the
Maybe we
question.
need to do a bit of both.
Little both.
Sure, combine instruction and delight, says the Roman poet, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're supposed to do. I don't know. Given the material we're talking about, the light seems to me to be a rare occasion, but still in all. It has come to my attention, for example, that on this snowy day in Champaign-Urbana, we're actually observing the anniversaries both of the execution of King Louis XVI in 1793 and the death of V.I. Lenin in 1924. Two examples of the effects, perhaps, of social upheaval, exactly the sort of social upheaval that the Davos participants are most worried about. I really think they are worried about it. I mean, the past is prologue here, and even things as long ago as the French Revolution are background to some of the things that this particular set of rats are saying. Particularly the notion that the poor aren't dying fast enough, and something must be done about that, seems to me to suggest that the possibility of coming struggles are very serious. The possibility is very serious indeed. We'll turn to Karen Aram on the pivot to Asia that Mr. Obama has announced.
Okay, well, I started with Thailand last week, so I'll continue this week, starting with Thailand. Thailand was known as anchor land to the U.S. during the Vietnam War, during the 60s and 70s. And at one point, under the, first it was the Johnson administration, and then reaffirmed by Nixon, they decided that they wanted to have a veneer of democracy in Thailand. This was the CIA, I'm sorry, it was the CIA decided to have a veneer of democracy. So they poured millions into an election, okay? An election that would support the ruling junta at the time, the military general junta. And the election came off, and the ruling junta won handily. But the rulers grew impatient with the trappings of democracy, so they soon ended the experiment, suspending the Constitution and disbanding Parliament. Later, the generals were brought to explain themselves to their friends at the American Embassy in Bangkok that evening. They said they respected the principles of democracy and had tried to put them into action, but it was clear that Thailand today, democracy just didn't work. So the CIA's covert action had been the thinnest veneer, and there should be no change to Thai relations with the U.S., Kissinger told Nixon after the coup. The leaders of the Revolutionary Council are, in fact, essentially the same ones with whom we have been dealing all along, so we can anticipate that our programs in Thailand will continue without interruption. Now that brings us up to this I'm reading from Legacy of Ashes, The History of the CIA by Tim Weiner, and this was taken from page 351, 352. So that brings us up to today, where you actually have protesters in the streets protesting against their own democracy. But I want to point out that some of the information I receive from some people is that there are many more protesters protesting in support of democracy. They just don't get the media coverage there. And this brings me to some speculation on my part as to why this is happening, what's behind it, because I think that's what we really need to look at. And one of the things that I know is that under the Thaksin or the Yingluck government was proposed a China Railway, okay? China Railway Corporation was coordinating a task force for the China-Thailand Railway project. And their hopes was that the new Thai government will continue the existing plan to modernize the country's railway sector, including the high-speed rail project. Now, I want to point out that this was, according to this article that I received, this was actually initially Thailand and China started talks on cooperating on a high-speed rail project during the government of Abhisit Wejjijiwa in 2010. The same year, the task force was founded to discuss this cooperation between the two countries. And China and Thailand signed a memorandum of understanding on the railway cooperation in April last year in Beijing during an official visit by Prime Minister Yingluck. However, the dissolution of Parliament recently has raised uncertainties over the government it's about $2 trillion, which would be, I think, approximately $7 million US dollars. This transport infrastructure scheme, part of which is a plan to establish 4 high-speed railway routes connecting Bangkok to Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is their northernmost city. Nong Khai, Rayong, and Hua Hin. Now, Nong Khai is right on the border of Laos to the north. The Constitutional Court has accepted a petition to review the bill authorizing the government to seek loans to implement the Baht 2 trillion program. Some parties have also questioned the financial sustainability of the scheme. But here's what, it's a little bit of concern because it does mean that this could be completely canceled out. I'm not going to read all of this to you. It could be completely canceled if the Thaksin government, or under his sister, his proxy, does not get back into government. It might be canceled. And right now, Thailand is experiencing high cost for their own food and vegetables, fruit and vegetables. For example, a mango costs more money in Bangkok now. And Bangkok produces mangoes. I mean, they actually grew on the tree outside my backyard. You can actually purchase an apple flown in from Australia cheaper than a mango grown in Thailand. Mm-hmm. This is a serious issue. And I know when my daughter was there this past summer, she complained about the high cost of the fruit. And I said, well, maybe it's just in Bangkok. But it was pointed out to me that for many years, my daughters would buy fruit from the different food stands, okay, outside. The prices were always the same. You might have to negotiate a bit, but it was always approximately the same. But today it's a concern that they're so expensive. Now, Yingluck has been saying that's why they need the high-speed rail, because the cost of flying things into Bangkok was too expensive. Anyway, this is all for discussion, but why am I concerned with this is because I also wonder what this may have to do with China and what it may have to do with the U.S. So then I find that a $20 billion high-speed railway project to connect the coastal town of, and I can't say this, Kiak Piu in Rakhine State in Burma has been proposed, and it's still at the proposal stage, I believe, at this time. Now, this article comes from October 2013. Rakhine State is right on the border, okay? Well, it's in Burma, but it's on a port, okay? It's right on the Indian Ocean. And theirs would be from Burma to Kunming in South China. Now, China would fully fund the project, providing easy access to the Indian Ocean trade routes through an 800-kilometer high-speed railway network. It will also provide a tie to the work the Indian government is doing on the port in that region. Now, what the Burmese official has said is that we will only accept this if it offers opportunities to the country and everyone, the public, the government, the parliament, agreed to it. Burma has been under tremendous Western pressure to rebuff Chinese overtures for joint development, often under the guise of human rights and environmental concerns. Now, what Western nation currently has the most influence in Burma since 2007? Yes, it's the U.S. So that's what made me think that. So this is actually on hold, okay? The one in Burma is on hold. It's very important because they say that, now here's something interesting. China plans to build and operate the railway and eventually hand it back to Burma after 50 years. High-speed trains would carry up to 4,000 tons of goods running at speeds of up to 170 kilometers per hour, according to a report from Arakan Oil Watch. And it's described, and it goes on to say they're a rather ratty green NGO. Well, I looked them up. They're out of MIT, so I don't know how ratty they are. But
The rat team.
yes, yes. So the Western pressure on Burma makes me wonder about the Western pressure on Thailand, if there's any there or not. There's no accounts of it, but I'm sorry, based upon the past, I have to rather assume it is. And let me explain why this railway is so important to Thailand and to China. Laos has already broken ground. Now this is dated the 3rd of this month. They've already broken ground on an ambitious high-speed railway project linking the country's western border with Thailand to Vietnam. And is likely to begin full construction this month, according to sources. Now, Laos is not using China, okay, railways. They're using a Malaysian company known as Giant Consolidated. But what's important about this is that, and if you have a chance to look at a map, I have one, but it's much too small. This is what I think is important, is that the one that they're going ahead with is from Savananaket, okay, that's right on the border of Thailand, in Laos. It goes to Lao Bao in Vietnam, which is on the ocean, right near the ocean there. Laos was also in negotiations to borrow $7.2 billion US from China to fund a second planned rail line, okay? And that second planned rail line would link their capital of Vientiane to Kunming, to southwestern China. So, and given the fact that Thailand, I know one of the concerns of the former government under Abhisit was the Democratic Party. Remember, it's Suthep who left the Democratic Party to lead the protest against the Thaksin government, okay? One of the concerns was that somehow they wanted to do this up to Nong Khai. Nong Khai is on the border of Laos. In fact, it's the border town you go through when you fly up to Laos, to Vientiane. You usually go through Nong Khai. So this would connect, this is what they're actually referring to now as the Iron Silk Road. You've already got, I've got the information here, and it was actually reported by CNN that in the smoggy cradle of China's industrial heartland, a heaving freight train gets set to depart along a modern incarnation of the legendary Silk Road trading route. Basically, what used to be dusty trails by caravans, okay, and horses, today it takes the form of a series of transnational rail tracks transporting the latest electronic products and computer parts, okay? And these trains, I mean, they cross through, there's a north-south corridor stretching from Russia through Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, all the way to the Persian Gulf port of Bandar Abbas in Iran, okay? And it's also cited by the UN group as a possibility. So there's so much going on, and this was supported by the UN, by UNSCAP projects. But what we are looking at is trade routes, okay? That would, if you've got all of this going through, they actually have it going to Germany already, Düsseldorf, Germany, from China. You have these trade routes transporting goods. What they can do, their outlets, and then of course through Thailand, it goes all the way to the south. It goes to all the way to Singapore. That's the plan that's being readied. Once you get to Singapore, you're right on the biggest port near the Malacca Straits. The Malacca Straits are the area that all shipping goes through from Asia. But if China has a port in Burma, if they're able to get by train to the port in Burma, or even parts of Thailand or Malaysia, they would then be able to bypass the Straits of Malacca and go directly from there to distribute their goods. But it's more than that. It's not just about distributing their goods, it's about bringing in their products from Africa, from Iran. One of the concerns, evidently, is that the port of, I don't say it right, Hormuz in the Persian Gulf is an area whereby the U.S. could close it down and put a stranglehold on it. So China has been very industriously looking at all of these potential trade routes throughout, busy building. So I just can't help but wonder if perhaps there's something else ongoing in Thailand than just the mere usual money politics, which means the Democrats, maybe they would prefer not doing this deal with China, or maybe they simply, the generals who the Democrats support, simply want to make sure they get their piece of the pie. And that whole project is dependent upon who the government is that actually makes the contract. But they're saying here that, and I think it's important to note that they might actually sink the project. If the Thaksin government doesn't get back in, it will not receive royal approval, and as a result, it may not go through until the Democrats get in and maybe change things. So.
Thank you, Karen. You're watching Aware on the Air. Karen Aram giving us an account of President Obama's pivot to Asia and how it's involved in Thailand in the economic and potentially military conflict with China that American policy envisions, and that involves, of course, also the Middle East, because one of the greatest issues between China and the U.S. is control of world energy supplies. Got a response to this, Ron?
Yeah, well, two questions, one trivial. You were talking about the Thai unit of monetary unit, the currency, the baht, that's B-H-A-T.
Yes.
About how much is one worth in dollars?
Okay, I think it's approximately, when I lived there, it was 25 baht per dollar. I think it's approximately 32 now, 32 baht per dollar, 32, 34.
Yeah.
You put your 3 cents in, basically.
Yeah, something like that. And let me be clear. What I'm coming up with is pure speculation that the U.S. may have something to do with this. I have not read anything whatsoever, and I haven't even seen or read anything that is related to what is happening in Thailand now being related to the railway project.
Yeah.
That is pure speculation on my part.
Okay, the more important question is what is the significance of this expansion of the railway network in Asia? Do you think U.S. strategic planners see this as a kind of threat, integrating
Yes.
the Asian continent much more, giving China
Yes.
access to the Indian Ocean and to the east coast of Africa,
Absolutely.
And is that a challenge or a threat to American global dominance?
Yes, it's a threat to, again, I don't see it as a threat, but Washington, I think, certainly sees it as a threat that somehow China will economically be better off, and they'll have the resources. I mean, right, I just read recently that, in fact, the U.S., some of the U.S. corporations are selling off their oil wells in Iraq, and they're selling them to Chinese companies. You know, and another thing, I have information here that relates to the pipeline. I mean, already China is receiving oil and gas through pipelines in Burma. You know, Burma is very important because it is a very rich in resources, primarily oil. We've always known gems and minerals, but also oil. And they've been supplying Thailand for quite some time now, and they have the pipelines also to China. China is rich in oil resources, but they use less than half of their own resources currently. So, and as I said, when you look at the map, and I wish I could have a map put up here, and you look at the routing that is taking place regarding what they call the Iron Silk Road, it's really clear how important it is to China and to other nations in the area. It's of relatively no importance to the U.S., okay? None whatsoever, except that we see ourselves in such great competition.
Yeah.
You know, if you remove that competitive competition for minerals and resources and oil, et cetera. But I guess I just speculate because what we see is Obama's pivot to China, or to Asia, to contain China. And I can't help but think that this may be one of the reasons, and it may be what's behind some of what's happening. And when I recognize that Burma is being holding back on going ahead with their project, which would open up things for them, perhaps not necessarily, that would take a lot more time than what we have here to discuss the situation in Burma. But the Western influence clearly to me is the U.S., because when we went in 2007 and said, okay, we may eliminate sanctions, we've had sanctions against doing business with Burma since the early 90s, and that's when on condition that they would release prisoners, political prisoners, which certainly included Aung San Suu Kyi, and they're going to hold elections. But it's still very iffy. It's still very iffy, and we haven't completely dropped sanctions yet. So.
Okay, final comment. You alluded to geopolitical considerations, which are extremely important here. I believe most people don't talk or think about those enough, and the importance of looking at maps.
Yes, yes.
And again, we don't have a good way of showing maps here, but
I should do some of that. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and I even
a lot of this will become much clearer to you
Right.
if you simply look at a map.
Yeah, I
of the
printed
South
some
Asian
out.
region.
I printed some out, but I don't know how useful they would be. I'm not very techy, so I don't know if they're anything that would be of any value to put up.
We could try to do that.
If you want to, I mean, I don't know. But when you look at the map, you're quite right. When you look at the map and you see the route and you see the planning, it becomes fairly obvious that.
Well, thank you very much for that, Karen. In the last segment of Aware on the Air for today, we have a piece from Chris Hedges, who has written very well about politics recently and has also been very active. He was involved in the case that took to the courts the president's clearly unconstitutional demand to be able to hold incommunicado anyone he considers a terrorist. What Hedges has done for us this week is given us account of what President Obama meant to say or should have said in his speech that he gave last Friday, if he told the truth, says Hedges. What Hedges has done with Obama's Friday speech is what actors call articulating the subtext, that is saying what really was meant in the speech against the lies that the speech itself contained. So here is President Obama speaking on Friday in Chris Hedges' reading. A small secret surveillance committee of goons and thugs hiding behind the mask of patriotism was established in 1908 in Washington, D.C. The group was led from 1924 until 1972 by J. Edgar Hoover, and during his reign it became known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. FBI agents spied upon and infiltrated labor unions, political parties, radical groups, especially those led by African Americans, anti-war groups, and the civil rights movement in order to discredit anyone, including politicians such as Henry Wallace, who questioned the power of the state and big business. Agents burglarized homes and offices, illegally opened mail, and planted unlawful wiretaps. Bureau leaders created blacklists. They destroyed careers and sometimes lives. They demanded loyalty oaths. By the time they were done, our progressive and radical movements, which had given us the middle class and opened up our political system, were dead. And while the FBI was targeting internal dissidents, our foreign intelligence operatives were overthrowing regimes, bankrolling some of the most vicious dictators on the planet, and carrying out assassinations in numerous countries, such as Cuba and the Philippines, and later Iran, Guatemala, Vietnam, Chile, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Throughout American history, intelligence services often did little more than advance and protect corporate profits and solidify state repression and imperialist expansion. War for big business has always been very lucrative and used as an excuse to curtail basic liberties and crush popular movements. Inter arma silent leges, as Cicero said, or during war, the laws are silent. In the Civil War, during which the North and the South suspended the writ of habeas corpus, and up to 750,000 soldiers died in the slaughter, Union intelligence worked alongside Northern war profiteers who sold cardboard shoes to the Army as the spy services went about the business of ruthlessly hunting down deserters. The First World War, which gave us the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act, and saw President Woodrow Wilson throw populists and socialists, including socialist leader Eugene Debs, into prison, produced $28.5 billion in net profits for businesses and created 22,000 new millionaires. Wall Street banks, which lent $2.5 billion to nations allied with the United States, made sure Wilson sent U.S. forces into the senseless trench warfare so they could be repaid. And we mentioned earlier Lord Keynes' famous account of what was going on in his book on the economic consequences of the peace, but that's not what Mr. Obama brought up in his discussion on Friday. World War II, which consumed more than 50 million lives and saw 110,000 Japanese Americans hauled away to internment camps and atomic bombs dropped on defenseless civilians, doubled wartime corporate profits from the First World War. Why disarm when there was so much money to be made from stoking fear? The rise of the Iron Curtain and nuclear weapons provided the justification by big business for sustaining a massive arms industry, for a huge expansion of our surveillance capabilities, and for more draconian assaults against workers and radicals. The production of weapons was about profits rather than logic. We would go on to produce more than 70,000 nuclear bombs or warheads at a cost of $5.5 trillion, enough weapons to obliterate every Soviet city several times over. And in the early days of the Cold War, with Hoover and Joe McCarthy and his henchmen blacklisting anyone with a conscience in government, the arts, journalism, labor unions, or education, President Harry S. Truman created the National Security Agency, or NSA. Throughout this evolution, Americans were steadily shorn of their most basic constitutional rights and their traditions of limited government. U.S. intelligence agencies were always anchored in a system of secrecy, with little effective oversight from either elected leaders or ordinary citizens. Meanwhile, totalitarian states like East Germany offered a sterling example of what our corporate masters might achieve with pervasive, unchecked surveillance that turned citizens into informers and persecuted people for what they said in the privacy of their homes. Today, I would like, says President Obama in its reconstruction by Chris Hedges, today I would like to thank the architects of this East German system, especially Erich Mielke, once the chief of the communist East German secret police. I want to assure them that the NSA has gone on to perfect what the Stasi began. In the 1960s, the U.S. government spied on civil rights leaders, the Black Panthers, the American Indian movement, and the critics of the Vietnam War, just as today we're spying on Occupy activists, environmentalists, whistleblowers, and other dissidents. And partly in response to these revelations decades ago, especially regarding the FBI's covert dirty tricks program known as COINTELPRO, laws were established in the 1970s to ensure that our intelligence capabilities could not be misused against our citizens. In the long twilight struggle against communism and now in the fight against terrorism, I am happy to report, says reconstructed President Obama, that we have eradicated all of these reforms and laws. The crimes for which Richard Nixon resigned and the abuses of power that prompted the formation of the Church Commission are now legal. The liberties that some patriots, including Daniel Ellsberg, Chelsea Manning, and Edward Snowden, have sought to preserve have been sacrificed at the altar of national security. To obtain your personal information, the FBI can now freely issue national security letters to your bank, doctor, employer, or public library, or any of your associates without a judicial warrant, and you will never be notified of the investigation. We can collect and store in perpetuity all metadata of your email correspondence and phone records and track your geographical movements. We can assassinate you if I decide you are a terrorist. We can order the military under Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act to arrest you, strip you of due process, and hold you indefinitely in military detention centers. We can continue to throw into prison those who expose the illegality of what we are doing, or force them into exile, as all totalitarian secret police forces from the SS to the KGB to the East German Stasi have done. And we can torture. The fall of the Soviet Union left America without a competing superpower. This threatened to delegitimize our massive spending on war and state security, now more than 50% of our budget. But a group of Islamic radicals who had never posed an existential threat to our country, that is, a threat to the existence of our country, emerged to take the place of the old communist bloc. The politics of fear and the psychosis of permanent war were able to be continued. The war on terror placed new and in some ways more complicated demands on our intelligence services. Our illegal and disastrous occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan and our indiscriminate bombing of other countries, along with the war crimes Israel is carrying out against the Palestinian people, are driving people in the Muslim world into the arms of these militant groups. We are the most hated nation on earth. At the same time, globalization, our corporate policy of creating a worldwide neo-feudalism of masters and serfs, means we must spy on citizens to prevent agitation and revolt. After all, if you're a worker, things are only going to get worse. To quash competitors of American companies, we spy on corporations in Brazil, including Brazil's biggest oil company, Petrobras, and on corporations in Germany and France. We also steal information from the leaders of many countries, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel, whose personal cell phone we tapped. However, Ms. Merkel, who grew up in East Germany, should not, as she has done, accuse us of being the Stasi. We are much more efficient than the Stasi was. We spied successfully on U.S. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, in addition to Pope Francis and the conclave that elected him Pope last March. Senior U.S. officials and Roman Catholic cardinals are highly susceptible to recruitment by Al-Qaeda, we say. The reasons are classified. I won't share them with you. Believe me. Remember, this is what President Obama should have said, was saying surreptitiously in his speech last Friday, as reconstructed by Chris Hedges. Threats to the nation raise new legal and policy questions, which fortunately our courts, abject tools of the corporate state, solve by making lawful everything from torture to wholesale surveillance. I would like to take a moment to thank our nation's compliant judges, the spineless deans of most prestigious law schools, and most law professors and lawyers for refusing to defend the Constitution. They have been valued partners, along with the press, in our campaign to eradicate your civil liberties. The horror of September 11th was masterfully manipulated by the security state and our for-profit military-industrial complex. These forces used the attacks as an excuse to increase the massive pilfering of taxpayer dollars, especially by the Department of Homeland Security, which has a public budget of $98.8 billion. The truth, however, is the system of internal security is so vast and so secret, no one in the public has any idea how large our programs are or how much we spend. It is true that our 16 intelligence agencies missed the numerous signs and evidence leading up to the 9/11 attacks. In short, they screwed up, just as they did when they failed to anticipate the fall of the Shah of Iran, or the collapse of the Soviet Union, or when they told us Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. But we have a rule in Washington: never reform failed bureaucracies or hold government officials accountable. Rather, give them more money. Keep failure secret. It is a testimony to the hard work and dedication of the men and women of our intelligence community that over the past decade we've taken enormous strides in making the Middle East a cauldron of rage. New capabilities and new laws have turned us into the most efficient killers on the planet. Relationships with foreign intelligence services have expanded, creating one immense global corporate system of surveillance and security that obliterates the rights of people at home and abroad. Taken together, these efforts have killed hundreds of thousands of innocents in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen. We have terrorized whole countries from the sky and forced millions to become refugees. This will ensure endless war, which ensures endless profits for those who make war, which is the point. Over the last 6 months, I created an outside review group on intelligence and communications technologies to make recommendations for reform. So says President Obama in this translation of his speech last Friday by Chris Hedges. This group is led by the same intelligence chiefs who carry out the abuses. The Chancellor of Germany has, like many of other allies, demanded we stop spying on citizens of that nation. But unfortunately for the Chancellor, as well as for you, my fellow Americans, we will continue to do whatever we want. The folks at the NSA and other intelligence agencies are our nation's voyeurs and peeping Toms. They raid your electronic bank and medical records. They know what you and your kids post on Facebook and Instagram. They have all of your emails and text messages. They track your movements through the GPS on your cell phone. They are not alone. Corporations of all kinds and sizes track your online searches and what you buy. Then they analyze and store the data and use it for commercial purposes. That's why those targeted ads pop up on your computer and your smartphone so often. Given the unique power of the state, it's not enough for leaders to say, "Trust us, we won't abuse the data we collected." History has too many examples of such trust being breached. Our system of government is built on the premise that our liberty cannot depend on the good intentions of those in power. It depends on the law to constrain those in power. And that is why Congress and our courts have rewritten our laws, from the NDAA to the FISA Amendment Act, to strip you of legal protection. I would not be where I am today, says this properly interpreted Obama, were it not for the courage of dissidents like Martin Luther King Jr., who were spied upon by their own government. But I, like Bill Clinton, has sold out those true patriots and gutted those government programs that made possible my own education and ascent into systems of elite power. As president, I understand, as do Bill and Hillary, that political power is about us, not about you. I know where power in this country lies. It does not lie with the citizens. It lies with Wall Street and corporate boardrooms. And since my vanity demands that I be famous, wealthy, and powerful, I work hard for those centers of power. None of these centers of power want to see any curbs on the security and surveillance state, and so I will make sure there are none. These are the words that Chris Hedges puts together out of the speech President Obama gave last Friday about the intelligence services, as we call them euphemistically, in the United States. What Hedges has done is have his stand-in for Obama tell the truth about what really is being done by the U.S. government and the corporate regime for which it works. This entire piece can be found on the web. Search for Chris Hedges, and you can find the rest of this paraphrase of our maximum leader's discussion of intelligence last week, which even his defenders were unwilling to defend, according to a very good piece written by David Swanson, which you might also want to read in connection with Hedges' interpretation of what was said. You've been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, in the fourth week of 2014. It's what White House aides call Terror Tuesday, the day each week when President Obama picks out some people to be murdered by drones or U.S. death squads, the U.S. Special Operations Command. The president's underlings, notably CIA Director John Brennan, compile a list of who should be executed, and the president then chooses from baseball cards who will die. The assassinations are carried out in secrecy. The administration doesn't release accounts of the people they kill. Literally thousands of men and women and children have been killed on Obama's order, and more will be killed this week. Look for the news later in the week of the result of this week's Terror Tuesday. Most Americans don't know that the U.S. is running this terrorist program, but President Obama has killed between 4,000 and 5,000 people with drones alone, including 200 children, and only slowly now are we coming to find the truth about the activities of the Special Operations Command in 130 of the 195 countries of the world. Obama told aides he's really good at killing people, according to a recent book, and the facts of the matter bear him out, although they are not often presented to the American people. Thanks to our director and producer, Jason Liggett. We also want to remind you of other programs like ours here on UPTV, now streaming online at urbanapublictelevision.org. Weekdays, Monday to Friday at 7 a.m., Democracy Now!, repeated at 5 p.m., and at 8 a.m., The Big Picture with Tom Hartman. Now, if you object to the Obama administration's conducting illegal and unjustified war and lying about the reasons for it, join us. Aware meets every Sunday evening, 5 to 6 p.m. at the White Horse Inn on John Street in Champaign, near the UC campus. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about, but Americans don't. Manning, Assange, Snowden, and the rest. And what we've got this week is calls by American congressmen and members of these intelligence services for the murder of Edward Snowden. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for Karen Aram, Ron Zoke, Karen Evans-Levy, Stuart Levy, David Johnson, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.